I wasn't sure how to approach this film, as it's one of my more personal experimental films, and it's about reflecting on one's life. It's an existential film, whereupon almost you see your life flash before you, all the choices you made in this journey that we call life. And the film has this aspect to it. It has images dislocated next to other images that start to feel like narrative. It was influenced in many ways by one of my favourite books, which is Catcher in the Rye, whereupon the character of Holden Caulfield attempts to step out of life in terms of the game of life, that he knows that there are rules to life. He knows that within what he's been born into, the type of family he's been born into, the type of education he has, he knows that these are important, but he does try to step out of it. And he starts to pursue a life which becomes terrifying, which is chaotic, which doesn't have rules, and things happen to him. And as we go through the book, we start to see that really he's got to go through a sort of a baptism of fire of seeing the darker side of life in order to appreciate that within the structure he has, he's got to play by the rules. And life is very much a game in this way. The word game seems to diminish what we call life, but in actual fact, just like a game, you have to make choices. And in this film, the character or characters that you see, they're always alone and either being observed or are making choices or are walking their path. And life is also, it's two parts. There is a spiritual side to life, a spiritual game, either that you reject a spiritual path, and that is a path where you embrace it. And these are both valid paths, but that's one of the many parts to life. And then there are all the crossroads that you will encounter throughout your life. In many ways, like you will see in this film, where every so often the character is doing things, observing things with the camera, or communicating to oneself. In returning back to Catcher in the Rye, Holden Caulfield is very suspicious, hateful towards cinema. He thinks it's phony. And in that way, yes, just like these images that you're watching now, they're very selective. They've been created and put together in such a way that you have no context as to what the meaning is behind them. And there are images, if you do watch this film, of the death of the director, whom you never see, but you see a director's chair overturned, and you see a hand holding a camera. And that there are parts to a film all the way through this. There are parts to a character's journey unfolding, and there are memories, and there are aspects to it that show life doesn't settle, it's not static. Things corrode, they decay. And in this film, on the soundtrack, there is a chanting that starts partway through. And this chanting, which I think is in Arabic, it speaks of a return to the good old days, but they're gone. And this very much, again, is this existential question of, well, you need to remember that ultimately you're heading towards death, and that you shouldn't be taking your life for granted in walking your path. And in walking your path, you shouldn't take for granted the choices you make. And in the same way, when Holden Caulfield steps out of the life that he has when he leaves his school, he goes to New York, and he meets a prostitute, and he meets the pimp, and he starts to get down on his luck, and suddenly he's adrift because he's in a world that's not his world, a world without rules, a world of desperation, a world where people make choices on impulse, a world where people make choices on necessity or the fact that they have nothing and they have nothing to lose. And Holden Caulfield isn't that guy. And in the same way, this film has that aspect to it where we have a character walking this path making these choices, observing, and you can see sometimes fragments of other people's lives. There's one shot in London Bridge where there is graffiti that just says jobs, and it's all run down, and it shows that whoever wrote that was desperate, and that in those times when it was written, they were desperate times. And you will see Brighton Pier all burnt, and the good times are gone. Whatever heyday it is, it's gone. Whatever choices were made in that wonderful pier, they're gone, and each individual who passed through there has to live with them. So this is a very, very personal film with images that are there to evoke. They're there to evoke the past, and many of the images are 20 years old at least. I made this in 2020, which probably for many people was a very reflective time. The film also draws attention to the artifice of filmmaking, the simulation of reality, a reality that is framed and decontextualized, that each image you see is only from a subjective point of view, and you never know the intention behind why that image was actually ever made. And so we return back to Holden Caulfield. Holden Caulfield, in the end, realizes that what he must do is to return back to his education, back to his teachers, and back to the life that he has. And he's very fortunate that he can do that, because this door can be closed for many people, but for Holden Caulfield it isn't. And he has a realization. And yes, he can't tell you, the reader, really what he knows. And he even offers a threat at the end to emphasize this point. Because life, your life and my life, you need to discover it for yourself, what you must do. And it cannot be taught, and it cannot be told. You'll have teachers on your path, on the way, and you can either listen to their advice or ignore it. But they can't really transfer all that you must do. They can't tell you why it's so important. Only you can figure that out. And so, just like this film, it's very subjective and at times mysterious. One last point. The very last image of this film is a merry-go-round, or rather, a carousel. And in Catcher in the Rye, Phoebe loves these carousels and sits on it, going round and around and around, while Holden Caulfield observes. And this could be representative of the wheel of samsara, where somebody just keeps living the same mistakes and making the same bad choices. They just go around and around and around. Anyway, I'll leave it here, and if you continue watching, well, I thank you very much. Goodbye.